Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the conference room for the second panel of the conference addressing Innovation for Better Coordination of Local, National, Regional, and International Processes. Please join me in welcoming to the stage the chair for this session, Benjamin Traoré, Associate Professor at the Mohammed VI Polytechnic University. And now, please welcome to the stage the speakers for this session. Norman Sempija, Associate Professor at the Mohammed VI Polytechnic University. Loredana Teodorescu, Head of the Mediterranean Women Mediators Network. Ahmedou Abdallah, former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania. And Paul Simon Handy, Senior Advisor at the Institute for Security Studies. Before giving the floor to the chair for this session, we will view a short introductory video for the panel.
This panel calls for reflections on the innovations needed to strengthen coordination between local, national, regional, and UN levels, aiming to enhance the effectiveness of mediation processes. The objective is to develop more integrated approaches for more effective, coordinated, and non-competitive conflict management. What avenues exist for better integrating AU, RIC, and UN mediation approaches? How can traditional norms be consolidated in the mediation process? What synergies can be found between AU leadership, RIC primacy, and the utility of civil society and the sovereignty of conflict-affected states?
Benjamin Traoré, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So it really gives me a pleasure to moderate this session. And as it was said, my name is Benjamin Traoré, and I am a professor here at the Polytechnic, Mohammed VI Polytechnic University, and I teach international law especially. So I think the introductory video makes a very good job at introducing our session, the key word of which is coordination. So all of us have been here for the previous session, and we have heard a lot on how mediation mechanisms are complex, to say the least, especially on the continent. And one thing that is sure is that mediation is going to stay with us. And fortunately, and I'm not being the bearer of bad news, we know that the continent is going through a lot of armed conflicts or generally conflict situations. And when you look forward, the picture might even be more worrisome. We know that there are many factors that could play a negative role in the way tensions and conflicts may unfold and develop on the continent. You have increasing inequalities within states. You have climate change issues. You have today geopolitical antagonisms that may play or continue to play a certain role in fueling domestic conflicts on the continent. And when you look at all this picture, the landscape of conflicts in Africa is characterized by the multiplicity of actors. And most of the time, these actors actually are not well coordinated. Their actions are not well coordinated. We can even speak of a sort of mediation traffic jam on the continent. You have so many mediators, so many actors at the domestic level, at the national level, at the regional level, and also at the international level. So the question is, therefore, how you design mediation processes that make sure that there is a coordination between all these actors. How do you make sure that you leverage on the comparative advantages of all these actors to deliver satisfactory outcomes for mediations in Africa? And to discuss these very important issues, I am pleased to have a terrific panel with seasoned experts on mediation issues, both in Africa but also internationally. So I'm going to introduce now the panel, starting for the far right, which is a bit fashionable today. But we have Paul Simon Andy. Paul Simon Andy is a senior advisor at the Institute for Security Studies, and is also the regional director for East Africa. Is equally a representative of this institution before the African Union. Next to him, we have Minister Ahmedou Ould Abdallah. Minister Ould Abdallah is a former Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Islamic Republic of Mauritania. He was also an ambassador for the same country in Belgium, Luxembourg, and Netherlands, as well as the EU and the US, the United States of America. So Mr. Ould Abdallah has an extensive experience in conflict mediation and peace building, and we will hear from him this afternoon. So after him, we have Miss Loredana Teodorescu, who is the chair of the Mediterranean Women Mediation Network, and she's also the president of Women International Security, which is an Italian-based institution, and she's equally a senior fellow at the Institute for International Affairs, which is based in Rome. She has been involved in many mediation processes, and she will talk to us from the perspective of women's role in these mediation processes. And last but not least, my dear colleague, Prof. Norman Sampija. Prof. Sampija is an associate professor at the Faculty of Governance, Economics, and Social Sciences here at the Mohammed VI Polytechnic University. And Prof. Sampija teaches international relations and political science, and he has widely researched and written on issues related to peace and security, to especially the issue of the nexus between security and development in Africa. So please join me in welcoming this panel again. I will just bring to the attention of the audience that at the end of this session, we will have a question for the audience. So please bear with me, and I will announce the question. It will take you a few seconds to just give us one word as an answer. So without further ado, I will start by giving the floor to Jean-Simon Andy for his introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to start by thanking the Policy Center for the New South for the kind invite and for bringing us here within the framework of these gathering, which is really becoming a key gathering for peace and security in and on Africa. So in the next 7 or so minutes that were allocated to me, I would like to talk about a tale of difficult subsidiarity. The chair of our panel has introduced the topic by saying how coordination is difficult, and I will try and demonstrate why it is difficult and how these, what he referred to as a traffic jam of mediation, can be disentangled. But to do that, I would like to start with a bit of context, actually, because what we have today is a global, not just an African, but a global crisis of solutions. We have a crisis of international solutions to violent conflict. And mediation is just one of the tools that I wouldn't say is in crisis, but that is struggling actually to get its way. You know, in a place like the Sahel today, there's a lot of talk about whether or not there could be mediation with some actors who are responsible for violent conflict. So, to start, I would like to maybe say a few words about the African peace and security architecture, which is going through some crisis, but you know, it was inspired by Boutros Ghali's Agenda for Peace, which itself is being reviewed. We all are aware of all the negotiations leading to the Summit of the Future in September at the UN, with the aim of having a Pact of the Future coming from which will be a new agenda for peace. So, like, the African peace and security architecture was actually quite an innovative and in many ways a very original collective security arrangement in Africa. It was not only because, okay, it was inspired by international standards, but it had an African specificity, which was actually the subsidiarity. The subsidiarity that we have in the African peace and security architecture is not the subsidiarity that you, for example, have at the European Union. At the European Union, you have a 2 layers subsidiarity, namely the national and the supranational. At the AU, we have an intermediary level that is the sub-regional, so the regional economic communities. So how do we then negotiate peace and security? How do you mediate between these 3 levels is the real question. So these 3 levels bring together completely different actors, and I will come back to it. Mediation as one of the tools in which negotiation happens between these 3 levels has actually has evolved over the years. The African Union has professionalized its mediation capacity, the African Union and the regional economic communities. Development within countries are a bit outside the realm of what the AU does, and wrongly so, actually, because the design of national peace architecture actually also requires to develop it from the national level, but that's another question. But So the AU has evolved, and REX, they have evolved a lot. In the past, the AU started mediation relying a lot on the charisma of elder statesmen. So you basically had, the AU had to learn the hard way that mediation is actually a profession. It's a technical process. It requires extremely technical skills. There is only so much that charisma can achieve. So in the previous session, we talked a lot about the qualities that a mediator should have. Actually, we should be looking at the mediation team, not just the mediator. A mediator can be the greatest if he has a poor team, and we have examples where it happened, actually. I can think of a country like Kenya during the post-electoral violence in 2007, where actually someone I will not name was sent, and with literally no team, and the results were terrible. But in the last 10 to 15 years, there have been a lot of efforts in building the capacity of the AU and REX in mediation. So today we have the panel of the wise, among others, and within it we have FemWise, and I'm sure Loredana will talk about it. We have wise youth, high-level panels, special representatives of the chairperson in Africa. So we have a lot of capacity. But as someone was saying, between mandate and reality, implementation, there's a gap. Why is there a gap? Also because there's a lack of consensus between the AU and REX. You know, the AU and REX are strange bedfellows. When you look at APSA, it puts the Peace and Security Council of the African Union at the top of decision-making on peace and security matters in Africa. But in reality, there's no hierarchical relationship between the AU and REX. The AU did not create the REX. The REX they are subject of international law as much as the AU is. They're actually equals legally. So there is a contestation there between REX and the AU. The REX basically telling the AU, you cannot tell us what to do. And this, of course, plays out in all aspects of peace and security, including in mediation. So managing this subsidiarity happens to be extremely difficult. There's a lot that has been done. MOUs have been signed between the two levels, but doing it in practice is very difficult. There's institutional competition between the two, and behind institutional competition, there's also a competition for funds. Let's just be completely honest. It's also about money. In the previous panel, somebody was asking whose capacity are we actually building? Is it the capacity of the AU, of the REX, at the national level, at the provincial level? We can even go down. But generally, REX do not want the AU to get involved on mediation matters within a country of their, in their constituencies. So, so this is a real question because there is this massive capacity that has been built over the years in Africa today, but when there's a conflict somewhere, actually this capacity is hardly used. One of the reasons is that the AU does not necessarily know what capacity lies at the regional level and sometimes also at the national level. So I will finish with a way forward for better coordination, which in my view means burden sharing. How do we actually improve the synergies between the various levels, but also how to integrate civil society. A few, I don't like the word recommendations, but maybe a few points as food for thought. The AU needs a roster of mediation capacity in Africa in general, because some other organization know where the capacity lies, but the AU in Addis Ababa does not know, although it has a mediation and dialogue division. Another point for further thought is actually also the involvement of the private sector into the mediation process. This capacity for mediation, women's capacity has been recognized, even the youth. But in reality, you know, when a peace agreement is signed and has to be implemented, for certain dimensions of it, you need the business sector. And in very few occasions, they're actually involved in the negotiation. And thirdly, the AU and the RECs need to, it was said in the previous panel, need to invest more in conflict prevention. It's something we repeat and repeat. It's much cheaper and so on and so forth. There are low-hanging fruits that we do not use. The AU has special envoys, for example, that are understaffed, under-equipped, underfunded, but they are the best and probably the cheapest tools that we have at our disposal to do preventive mediation, not to come there as in a reactionary way, as the colleague from the UN was saying. We know it's very difficult to do conflict prevention, to make a political case for conflict prevention. It's easy. I mean, it's difficult to win the Nobel Peace Prize, yeah, if you do conflict prevention, because the outcomes of your work cannot be seen. So you are successful when there's nothing. So I would like to end with it.
Thank you very much for your insightful thoughts, comments, recommendations on these very important issues. So if I have to summarize, I think burden sharing between these different levels is an important takeaway here from your perspective. So I have probably a few questions for you, but we can leave that for the Q&A session. I will now turn to Minister Ould Abdallah. You have had an impressive experience on mediation issues, peace building in general, but international affairs more broadly. So what perspective, or what are your views on this important issue regarding coordination? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank the organizer. You ask the right questions. You know, it was easier in the late 90s, in the early 2000s, to address and settle a dispute than today. Why? Because mass communication, WhatsApp, easy contact. The rebel group used to be confined in their place. In the late 90s, during the Civil War, the first Civil War I saw, even during Côte d'Ivoire Civil War in 2002, communication was not easy. The whole things had changed now with WhatsApp, easy contact, telephone, and so on. Every rebel group or every individual can look bigger and stronger thanks to communication. It makes it difficult. Second, illegal business. If you look, most funding is through illegal business, but it comes under a beautiful, great, honorable agenda, either a religious or political, and so on. Three, the contagious effect. If you have a civil war in a place, there is a good chance that neighboring countries are contaminated because ethnicity or religion. So it is very important. I was going to say a few centuries ago, you know, the well-known strategist Clausewitz, the German, said something I like very much, said that the best way, he said that to end, he said that war is a continuation of politics by other means. A war is the continuation of politics by other means. This is absolutely true of interstate war, but more true of the war in civil country. You have politicians, they don't agree, they take arms. And especially with the ethnic border, they can count or get the support of their ethnic group, especially when corruption is massive, unpunished, and when injustice prevails, and drug trafficking. So on this point, most civil conflict, though they come under an umbrella of religion, very often it is business, traffic in migrant, cigarette, in the drugs, and it is very lucrative. So for them, there is no reason to end a civil war. They have prestige, they have money, they have everything. To address it, the best is to address bad governance, especially corruption. Corruption exists everywhere, but in some countries it is punished because there is free media, free police, free justice. In many countries, this is not the case. And it is not a tribunal, but we talk on addressing this problem. Where you have no police, no justice, and no free press, you have the basis of a civil war. And because the border cross ethnic groups, and between brackets, this is no specificity to Africa. If you go to France, the border with Italy and Spain is same population. The border with Germany and Belgium, same population. I'm going next month to Central Asia. I was in Uzbekistan, same country. So it is governance, not for border. It is our governance, which is, in my opinion, the problem. So the contagious effect of corruption and corrupt practices, the lack of real governance, make people go take arms to defend themselves, to defend their objective, and this is where we have this civil war. How to address it? How to address it is very difficult. I sent a mail to the chair last week. I was in Burundi in 1993, in Cote d'Ivoire 2002, and later in a number of countries, Somalia. It was much easier to discuss with people than today. Again, because communication, because resources, how to settle a dispute, and a leader who is maybe in a far away continent may give instruction by phone to his people, don't accept or don't do, and so on. What to do? To negotiate, we have to do something on something. And especially behind all this, money talks. Behind most civil war. I don't know if we can name states. I don't like to name a state. I have not spoken to it. But whatever in Asia, in Middle East, or in Africa, money is behind. In Europe, they had civil war. The Tupamaros were in Latin America. The Red Brigade in Italy, they had in the 90s, they settled them. We can settle our dispute. So, Mr. President, I think it is very important in addressing conflict to address good governance and transparency, especially with easy communication today. And in this point, I'm very happy as a preventive measure. A few years ago, Morocco addressed the problem of religion as behind civil war in the Sahel by establishing not a school but a center to train or discuss or form imam. I think it was a good preventive measure to show the religion is not a monopoly of a group or another. So in conclusion, prevention is easy said than done. But addressing corruption at local level, at national level, addressing not racism but tribalism and regionalism are the best preventive measures to address. But lastly, international community. You cannot have a tragedy in Ukraine seen by everyone in the street. The same in the Middle East between Israeli and Palestinian. And you see how massively they are addressed. So many in Africa said, why not us? Of course, it's not the same importance, but it impacts on public opinion and on people. So thank you very much. But conflict are linked to corruption, to mass communication. Religion is only a cover to address it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. This is very informative, very instructive. I mentioned and I noted a few points very relevant that could help us actually think of innovative ways of approaching mediation, especially in Africa. You mentioned the changing landscape of conflicts. I think you are probably very well placed to tell us about this because as I was doing some background research for this session, I discovered that you were involved in the early 90s in the Burundian peace process. So from that period to now, obviously, a lot have changed. And you mentioned the role, for instance, of business actors in conflict situations, which was also echoed in the first presentation. How do we mobilize these actors when it comes to mediation? For instance, this is a very important question. I've heard recently that a Chinese company in Benin, for instance, is playing an important role in the conversation between Benin authorities and Niger authorities, for instance, regarding the tension between the two countries. How do we capitalize on that? You mentioned also technology. I think this is very important. In the previous session, someone mentioned technology as a tool that could be used positively in mediation, but you seem to be more reserved on the role of technology in current conflicts. So all this is very interesting and very important food for thought. I will now give the floor to Loredana for to discuss or to tell us how we can factor in women. We have been speaking about that today. So how women can be factored in these mediation processes. You have been working on that, and yeah, we are looking forward to your thoughts. Thank you.
So thank you very much, and thank you first of all to the organizers for inviting me and for promoting such an interesting discussion. And I would like here to bring, let's say, a different perspective. And first of all, my experience as head of the Mediterranean Women Mediators Network, which is an initiative launched by the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2017. Since then, since the beginning, implemented by two civil society actors, namely Istituto Affari Internazionali, a think tank, and Women in International Security Italy. And I believe that it's an initiative which clearly recognizes the role women can play for peace and stability in the region. It gathers today more than 60 women from more than 20 countries from the region, from the four shores of the Mediterranean, which means North Africa, Middle East, Balkans, EU Mediterranean countries, and Turkey. So it's very diverse in terms of membership. And we are, of course, not the only one. I mean, over the years, many other regional networks have been established. If I look at the African continent, of course, FemWise is playing a leading role, but also the Arab network, which was more recently established, is also present in some countries. And so what I would like to bring here, based on my experience, is first of all the role of these networks. So how these networks, based on our experience, are contributing to the advancement of women, peace and security, to the advancement of the role and participation of women in peace and security, to mediation, but also to coordination, because I mean, this is the key point of our discussion today. And then I will try to look a little bit forward and see also what are the challenges and recommendations. So first of all, in terms of lessons learned and how we are contributing especially to coordination, the first point is really that we act as networks, as bridges between the different levels. So of course we have by definition a regional scope. So we are trying to bringing together the experience and expertise from different countries of the region. But at the same time, we always keep in mind and keep a focus on the international level, which means that we have different interlocutors. We are very much closely connected to the UN. We are involved in different discussions and international fora. And we also contributed to create what is called the Global Alliance of Regional Women Mediators Network, with the idea of bringing together different regional networks, amplifying their voice, and try to coordinate what we are doing, especially on the ground when we overlap in terms of geography or topics. But at the same time, we also keep a close focus on the local level, which means that in some countries we developed and established local antennas on the initiative of our mediators. We financially support some concrete initiatives on the ground, and in some cases we supported the establishment of national networks of women mediators, and this is the case, for instance, for Morocco, where the network established at the national level is really a great example in terms of coordination, because it was established by members of different regional networks, being FemWise, the Mediterranean, and the Arab one. But then, when I speak about being a bridge, being a connector, I also have in mind the connection we are trying to establish, the constant dialogue we are trying to keep between the institutional and political level on the one side, and the grassroots and civil society level on the other one. So first of all, as I said, we are already a product of this combination, so the institutional, initiative, but then an initiative run by civil society actors. We believe that both levels are really essential, so we need to access the stakeholders if we really want to bring a change, if we want to inform policies. But at the same time, we need the civil society, we need the grassroots level if we really want to understand what is happening on the ground, the root causes of conflicts, if we want policies to be informed by the needs and the real aspirations of people. So we always keep these two dimensions together. And then second point, as networks, of course, we bring together women with their own expertise, with their own knowledge, with their own capacity. Our mediators are active at different levels, and we are also promoting sharing experience. They are training, they are learning from each other, they are mentoring each other, and this is really essential to keep them in the different processes, and I believe that this is, let's say, an essential part of our work as well. And through their work, we are always integrating a gender perspective at all the levels. So we are make sure that a gender perspective is there in all the processes. And then third point, I would say it's really about visibility, advocacy, narrative. So we started with this specific mission, which is increasing the number of women in formal peace processes. But then over the years, we also understood that it's really important to give visibility to what happens already on the ground, often in informal settings, and which is often, I would say, unseen and unvalued, but is essential, especially in terms of preventive diplomacy, but also, I mean, we have many women active at community level. They are really strengthening the resilience of their own communities. In a way, they are creating the premises for peace and stability. So we need to recognize what is happening on the ground, what these women are doing, to value their work and to further support their work, which otherwise would be just isolated and not seen enough. when I see what we are doing, of course, I see progress, I see many achievements, but at the same time, I'm realistic here, and I would say this is as far as we can do. The whole system needs to change. The whole system also needs to see us, to recognize us, to engage us. And here, again, coordination and connection between different realities is essential. And I think that being here is also important because it's about learning from each other, knowing better each other, so it's also easier to engage each other in the different processes. So how to move forward? I would quickly address 4 points. First of all is about partnership. So clearly, in order to overcome today's challenges, we need a global and a collective effort. So we need to bring partners and the different actors together. We need to create synergies. We need to value the role of the civil society. We need to bring in different actors such as the private sector. And we need to understand that each of us has a role to play. So it's really about complementarity. And in this regard, about going back to the role of our networks, I think that we are also contributing in a way to a different narrative. So we are trying to showcase the fact that leadership is not just leadership to the front, is also about a collective leadership with each of us has a role to play. And we are trying to highlight the fact that local mediation is fully part of mediation, so it's equally essential to the final result. And this should be reflected also in the different partnerships. And then the second point is about creating synergies among policies and agendas. So too often institutions don't speak to each other. There is a multitude of initiatives just overlapping and duplicating efforts. And I think that we really need to overcome this silos approach. We need to connect more policies and agendas. For instance, when it comes to peace and stability, we know that these should be accompanied by investments in the economic and social development. When it comes to having women participating to the different phases of peace process, we know that this means also having women participating at all levels of the society. So we need an effort there to really understand what are the structural barriers and try to eliminate them with specific measures. So we need to put everything in a bigger picture, finding the connections. Third point is really about creating the space for diverse voices and perspectives, and this is what we are advocating for. So we are investing in capacity building, of course, but we believe that there is a need really also for a follow-up. So it's in the interest of all to have a diverse platform, diverse voices, diverse perspectives on the table. And for instance, in our case with the networks, we are showcasing that we already have women trained, experienced, who are willing to play a bigger role. So it's really about giving them or creating the space, the platforms, and benefiting really from their expertise. And then final point, which was already raised, is about the support. So of course, in order to continue our work, we need institutional and financial support. Otherwise, there is a risk, and this is already happening, to just create a not healthy competition in terms of funds, in terms of gathering the attention. So we really need to work there more in terms of complementarity, in terms of coherence of donor efforts in order to have a better coordination. And in the end, it all goes back to the political willingness. So there is a need for a political willingness to promote a collective action, to promote a more diverse dialogue, to promote complementarity, to promote a mutual understanding, which is the premise and should be a shared purpose, a shared objective for all of us, because it's about peace and security for the whole society, for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Loredana, for sharing your experience. Very impressive experience on the involvement of women and how you can better these type of involvement. You mentioned the need for engaging with grassroots organizations, and I think this is very important. Partnerships, synergies. There is a lot here to discuss, but I'm sure that we will get to that just at the Q&A session. So our last panelist is Professor Sampija, you have worked, as I said before, a lot on peace building processes. And yeah, would like to hear from you on how to deal with this issue of coordination when it comes to mediation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Prof, and thanks to my panel, but also thanks to PCNS for having me again. Right, so I divided my talk into 3 points. One is going to look at the process, what we call the peace process. The second point will look at actors or interlocutors, as we call them. And then the third point is going to focus on legitimacy. So 3 simple points, but I'm going to build on to that. Okay, traditionally, if you go back to Boutros Ghali, you remember that he came up with an agenda for peace, and I was talking to the minister here. We're talking about his contribution. And what came up there was the 4-track: preventive diplomacy, peacemaking, peacekeeping, and then peace building. Now, if you look at peacemaking as a process, and under here, that's what we're going to talk about mediation. This is kind of like the third least developed concept. We've developed peace building, we've developed peacekeeping. We haven't developed preventive diplomacy, like I was talking about. But I think also peacemaking has not been developed properly as a concept, so it's still lacking. And so the challenge we've had here is because it's a very political process. A number of actors are involved in the process, and so it always has moving parts. If I take you back to the UN has always had a burden sharing role. You look at processes in Africa, I think they were talking about them. African countries have been taking, or regional organizations have been taking care of the mediation. Then the UN comes in with the peacekeeping kind of like force. We saw this in the Lusaka Peace Accord in 1999. The African countries negotiated the peace, and then the UN sent in MONUC, which we later called MONUSCO. And so it's kind of like a burden sharing, which was taking place. But also the fatal flaw that I want to talk about here is that we've tended to look at peacemaking as an event because we have a number of issues that have to come into play. I think it was touched on in the previous session. So you have peacemaking. Once the peacemakers are done, they go. And then we bring in the peacekeepers and then the peace builders. And this is the challenge that we've had. And what happened in Sudan, for example, is South Sudan, is that the IGAD was able to negotiate the peace, and then they were sent home. And then the fighting broke out again. And then they had to come back a second time. Then they went home. Then the third time they had to come back in 2018. And then they established a permanent mission based in Addis Ababa, but also looking into the peace process in South Sudan. And so there's been an advancement that we are looking at peacemaking as a process. They're always back and forth movements. Once the fighting stops, there's always a possibility that something is going to break up again. Groups are going to fragment. I think this was the case in South Sudan again. The groups fragmented, and they were demanding new things on the table. And so this is a challenge that we have with the peacemaking process, and hence mediation. The other thing also is linked to that is the idea of the linear progression. We are hoping that we are going to progress from peacemaking to peacekeeping to peace building, and then we shall live happily ever after. I mean, this has been very, very difficult. I think we've only had 2 cases. I think this was in Liberia and maybe Sierra Leone, where we've had a cessation of conflict and the state has kind of like been rebuilt. But if you go back into those cases, you're going to find out that there was a lot of back and forth. I mean, ECOWAS came in, mediated, Armstrong, kind of like, twisted most of the players. They got some peace for a while, but then the fighting broke out again. And so this is the issue that we're having with peacemaking enhance mediation in that regard. Second point I want to talk about, because of lack of time, maybe we shall discuss in the later session, actors. Who are the actors on the table? Now, most of the time, if you go back again, because I'm kind of like keeping myself within the East African area, I feel safer there. And maybe the minister is one who has been on Burundi with your revelation, but okay. I'm safer in the East African area because we have a lot of things that have been happening there that speak a lot to mediation process. And so, go back to Congo. You look at 1999, who are the actors? It was the states. Kabila didn't want the big players to come, also the small players to come in. There's RCD Goma, RCD Kisangani, and there was a problem with establishing the peace. What happened next is that we have the peace later on in 2002 in the inter-Congolese dialogue. That's when they meet in Durban and all the players begin to talk. Yeah, and then they talk about the government of national unity, and thereafter, we have a semblance of peace in Congo, maybe until fighting breaks out in the east of the country. So, we need to have all the actors on the table, but who identifies the actors? I'm just going to troubleshoot maybe for you to let me, when you've discussed, let me know what you think about this. Who are the actors we need on the table? And also, what do we do about intervening actors? If you look at South Sudan, we had Uganda, which was supporting Salva Kiir, and until Uganda had to realize that its benefits were kind of like linked to the role of IGAD, Uganda was very hesitant to get involved in the peace process. But then when they realized we can get our interest through IGAD, then we began to move forward. And so in mediation, I think for the mediators, we need to have a mediation within a mediation. You need to make sure that the external players are also basically given a space, but also you don't let them dominate, maybe, but also you need to make sure that their interests are met, or they are aware that their interests are going to be met. And I think these are some of the challenges we're having in the cases that have broken out. For example, in Sudan, you have a lot of external players who are getting involved, and this is making it difficult to get to the right moment that Zatman was always talking about, because the players in the conflict are sure of the supply of maybe money, of weapons, and so they're going to continue the conflict, or they'll come to the negotiating table and waste other people's time. And so if you take care of the external actors, there's a possibility that the internal actors are going to come on the negotiating table. This is what happened again in 1999, like I've mentioned. Once Uganda and Congo, Uganda and Rwanda came on the negotiating table, they were able to get the other players to come to negotiate in 2002 thereafter. And third point, I'm trying to rush through here, is the issue of legitimacy of the mediator. It's kind of like interlinked in a way. If you appoint a mediator and you've not taken care of the interested parties in the conflict, the mediator is going to lack legitimacy. And so, as we saw with IGAD, IGAD struggled, okay, yes, they struggled a bit, but they were being backed by the UN, they were being backed by the regional actors, and also the AU to some extent. Yes, they failed in the first two negotiations, but they learned from that, and they came up with IGAD Plus, and that was able to bring in all other players to kind of like negotiate the conflict. And so, legitimacy of the mediator is very, very important. And we need to allocate the mediator that kind of legitimacy and support. Why has, for example, the AU not been able to mediate the conflict in Libya? Does it lack a legitimacy? Probably, among the different actors within the Libyan conflict. Why has IGAD not been very successful in negotiating the conflict in Sudan? Very successful in South Sudan? Okay, not very successful, but there's an element of success in South Sudan. Why is IGAD struggling in Sudan? Yeah, the question of legitimacy comes into play. And so, as we look at this whole kind of like process of mediation, we need to be able to apportion these players the kind of legitimacy they need. ECOWAS tried it, was using a lot of force, maybe back in the days. Even now, I think people have been kind of like very not happy with ECOWAS and the way it has been doing whatever it has been doing in the different conflicts. But we need to allocate a level of legitimacy to the players in one way or another to make sure that we have a successful mediation. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. This is very interesting, and obviously you mentioned these key points, mediation as a process. So we have to look at mediation more like a dynamic process than a static, mechanism that is there, and then after it's finished and there is nothing you can do. And you also mentioned the role of local actors. That's very, very important, how you mobilized local actors to bring them to the table. And lastly, the issue of legitimacy of mediators, being individual mediators or institutional mediating bodies. So I think at this point, we have our first round. And I would like maybe to ask very quickly a few questions, one question to each of you, actually, and maybe give the opportunity to the audience then to engage with you. So maybe starting from Poland. So Prof. Sampija mentioned lastly the issue of legitimacy, right? So when we think about that specific issue in the African context, it is quite obvious why sometimes legitimacy is an issue when it comes to the regional economics communities, because they are close to the situation and they might be biased. The UN was quite removed to this type of controversies. What we are seeing now on the continent is that the UN is also an actor that is more and more contested. So how do we go about this? Because this is quite a big challenge. I mean, it's the United Nations, and on many conflict zones, people are saying they should leave. So how do we go about this type of, challenge?
Thanks, Chair. In international relations, we distinguish between input legitimacy and output legitimacy. The input legitimacy is the legitimacy that is conferred by inclusivity, bringing everybody on board, so that the group of people who does whatever process is seen as representative and inclusive. Output legitimacy has to do with the result, the outcomes, the efficiency. So these two types of legitimacy can collapse actually by focusing a lot on input legitimacy, inclusivity. You can actually kill a process if your objective is just to bring everybody on board. We see that with many gender, with the way sometimes gender is considered, people go run and look for a woman. Doesn't matter whether she's qualified. At the end of the day, it's actually a disservice that is done to the gender issue than anything else. So we have to distinguish between those two and in any process. But regarding the contestation of certain actors, the UN, but the AU as well, it has exactly to do with the results, actually. We've seen transformation of conflict patterns in Africa, and unfortunately, the type of solutions, of international solutions that we bring to resolve those conflicts are just not adapted anymore. There's no easy fix there, but if peacekeeping is contested, because peacekeeping I wouldn't say it failed. I've worked in a peacekeeping operations, and I will be the last one to say it has failed, because it generally comes with a lot of success at also. But it doesn't solve the problem, particularly multi-dimensional missions, which tend or claim they want to solve the root causes of the conflict. They fail. And then we have situations where a peacekeeping operation lasts for 25 years. It's just too much. And it's perceived as actually not performing. So, yes, I will maybe stop there, and I hope I didn't confuse you too much.
Thank you very much. Now turning to Minister. You have mentioned very well the changing nature of conflicts. So we can also add in that picture the changing nature of actors, I would say non-state actors. So classic non-state actors, rebel groups, were what they are, but they were able to be brought to the table, and government were actually eager to talk to them. So today we have new forms of groups that governments do not want to talk to. For instance, terrorist groups. We know that in the Sahel region, many governments do not want to engage with them. How do you mediate in such a situation from your extensive experience?
Thank you very much. Just one point on the question you raised. I'm very interested in the peacekeeping. Peacekeeping, for general information, was established to make or to keep peace between two official armies. The mistake we made at the UN, and not the Secretariat, but the member state, is to have introduced peacekeeping in civil conflict, where you don't have a front line, where you don't have discipline. The first peacekeeping were between Israeli and Egyptian, 58, and it worked till 67. But when you have peacekeeping in a civil conflict, it becomes difficult because there is no front line, no official army, and so on. This is the point I made a number of times on. Now, concerning your question, it is very important for me, non-state actor. It has totally changed the nature of civil conflicts. And though by nature and conviction I am optimistic, I think it makes life very difficult to be optimistic when you see what is going on in the Sahel, which means from the Atlantic to the Red Sea. It is increasingly with non-state action in the conflict which make a problem. How to negotiate, like for instance in Sudan, like in Libya, like though in Libya they have two governments, they are officially, but in Sudan, in northern Nigeria, in Mali, Niger, and in Burkina, how to negotiate with people. Maybe the traditional way of addressing communities' leadership, but also addressing the real causes of conflict, which is, and I'm not fanatic about it, but it is corruption. Today, government keep governing as under one-party system, but with easy communication, you cannot do as you want. Everyone is informed of what the leadership is doing, including his or her discussion with those who visit the presidency in the evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I have to apologize to my colleagues here. We need to, give now the floor to the audience because we don't have much time left. So I will take a first round of questions, 3 questions, and I will ask the panelists to be very brief. As you can see, we don't have much time. I see a hand here, number 1, here, number 2. And other questions? Yes, 2 questions, please.
Hello. Good afternoon. Yasmin Hasnawi, American University in Kuwait. My question goes to Minister Ould Abdallah. So as you know, Mr. Minister, that we have entered into an era of trepidation and hope with armed conflicts, the rise of armed conflicts and Islamist insurgencies in Africa, which continue to destabilize the region, exasperating humanitarian and social needs. And here comes mediation, that is a form of crisis management. But now we found the mediators that actually are faced with many sides, guerrillas, ethnic groups, you name them, security companies, military organizations, etc. My question is related to the effectiveness of mediations. What are the main elements in actually ensuring that mediators are to be seen as independent and neutral to the actually concerned parties? And also another important question that I've always asked is, does nationality matter in terms of mediation? Thank you so much.
Yes, we take the second question.
Thank you everyone for your insightful contributions. First of all, let me briefly introduce myself. I'm Ferouz. I'm a second-year international relations student at the Faculty of Governance, Economics and Social Sciences, and would like to highlight a point made by Mr. Ould Abdallah in his speech. He emphasized that addressing corruption and poor governance is crucial to prevent intra-state conflicts. However, I would like to raise a concern. Could it be that neo-colonial influences exerted by external powers, particularly in the Sahel region, pose significant obstacles to the development of this effective governance? We can see that the increase in interferences of these countries in many parts of Africa, driven by their own interest, may indeed hinder the progress of governance in these areas in many aspects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 2 questions directed to Minister. So, yeah, I don't see another hand. So, yeah, a third one.
Yes, good afternoon. I introduce myself, Ben Lemleh Al Mustafa, former United Nations Resident Coordinator and Humanitarian Coordinator, including in Syria, Sudan, and Haiti. Talking about legitimacy of, and you mentioned the speaker, legitimacy, input legitimacy, and effectiveness legitimacy. Would you add a third one? If you are a mediator, would you take somebody who's got skin in the game, somebody who's got real interest in peace, somebody who really wants peace, because a non-peace is detrimental to, I mean, when I say somebody, it's a person or an organization, institution.
Thank you. So, yeah, I think 2 questions for Minister, and I guess the last question for you, Prof. Sampija. You spoke a lot about legitimacy, right? Just very briefly.
Well, thank you. These are very interesting questions, and when we get out of the room, we may discuss them further. But the question on effectiveness of mediation nationality is very important, because the parties live on their own perception, right or wrong. We cannot change it. It is a matter of conviction. And especially today, again, mediation in the late 90s, early 2000 is totally different from today, because accessibility of information, capacity to manipulate information. neutrality, I give you my case. I remember at one point in a country where I was mediating, I asked my closest associate not to accept any invitation unless they pay. Because the parties invite you and they tell the other parties something else. You have to go in a public restaurant or whatever, and you pay yourself, we reimburse you, don't accept. The perception in conflict is more important than the reality. This is very important. Now, on nationality, maybe it is increasingly becoming important. Again, I associated to mass communication. I was lucky in a way. I was from a small country. Who cares? No one is afraid of Mauritanian troops debarking or planes or closing banks or denying visa. So maybe it helps. It doesn't mean that you have to be from a small country to be accepted. I think if you are effectively neutral, people accept it. On corruption, I agree. On colonial impact, the colonial impact, I understand what you mean. And to speak frankly, in West Africa, for instance, most people think that France plays a role. You know, to speak plainly, I think recently 2 French presidents have made, in my opinion, bad communication, speaking publicly, ignoring the impact of mass media and manipulation and the role of WhatsApp. I have French friend. I told them, it is not my generation where you have to wait to listen to radio, TV, or buy paper. Today, information is instant. And interpretation is not by people from a panel or you, a student, but from the guy in the street. So major countries have to make attention to communication, including on the 2 wars I mentioned, Ukraine and Middle East. We used to have only international media. Today we have social network from Malaysia, from everywhere, from northern Mali. So this is what I'm going to say. So concerning corruption and the colonial impact is very important. And I think...
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Maybe just before you answer, Prof. Sampija, as I promised in the beginning of this session, we have a question for the audience. So please log on your application, and I hope the logistic will work. The question you will be asked to answer is the following. What could be, in your view, the key to successful coordination between different mediation actors based on your insight from this session? So we will see how the logistic works, and I just give the floor to Prof. Sampija for its comments very briefly.
Thanks very much. Yeah. Okay. When it comes to skilled mediators, yes, totally agree with you. We need a skilled mediator, but I think the way we've been doing it in Africa, for example, we have the panel of the wise. These are normally called upon, we need a statesman. I mean, Baba, gentleman in Nigeria, I've forgotten the name, sorry. Okay, I may take you to Burundi. Burundi, we had, I think, the issue with Nyerere, who was leading a mediation, and then, he was facing problems with the groups, and so after his passing, Mandela was appointed, and Mandela was able to kind of like galvanize the international players who were undermining the negotiation. And so, yes, we need a skilled mediator, but at the same time, I think the way in Africa we've been doing it is that you need this kind of like big personality to kind of like be the overhead, maybe below him or her. Then you can have these skilled mediators who are kind of like going to deal with the intricacies and break down the actual grievances between the different parties and bring them to an understanding. But I think we need to also appreciate the fact that, yeah, we've kind of like been doing mediation in quite a different way. yeah, with a big overall personality overseeing it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. I feel like it will be fair on Loredana if she has a question. Last one, very last one. I was wondering, you know, the focus that is oftentimes played on women mediators. It's very important, of course. But how do we also engage or make sure that women are represented in the negotiation process, like in, you know, the warring parties? How do they represent or reflect a certain gender sensitivities in the process of negotiation?
So for us, all the phases of the peace process are essential, and we are advocating for the presence and the participation of women in all the phases. And we are trying, first of all, to make the argument, so to raise the awareness. And sometimes we feel that we need to, you know, to start from the scratch and remake the argument again. But I think that this is essential because it should be very clear that this is not just about gender equality, but this is about what women can bring to the table. So they can really contribute to a more sustainable solution because they are bringing also their views, their knowledge of the local context, their specific experience. So first of all, it's about raising the awareness. And then I think that we can leverage different instruments in order to do that. So for instance, we have at the UN level, the Women, Peace and Security Agenda that exists. This is something that we can leverage. We can hold the governments and the institutions accountable for that. And I think that, you know, pushing for inclusion that does not come at the expense of effectiveness of the process. So this should be clear from the beginning. And I'm saying that because last week or 2 weeks ago, I was at this peace building forum in Bologna, in Italy, where it was raised many times, this contradiction between effectiveness and inclusion. And I think that there is no contradiction if we make the argument and everybody understands that this is really the interest of all to have more women at the table. At the same time, for us, it's also important that women can inform the process. I mean, it's not just about having a seat at the table. It's also about informing that process which is bringing them then to the table. So it's also what comes before that, which is equally important.
Thank you very much. I think we all have now our answers to the question that was posed. Obviously, communication seems to be overwhelmingly the answer. Also, open mind, genuinity of intent, trust, communication, transparency, credibility, clear objectives. And this brings us to the end of this session, and I can see here our time is exactly up now. I would like you to join me in giving a warm round of applause to our panelists. And yeah, thank you very much for your patience, and yeah, have a good rest of your evening. Bye.
We kindly ask the panel to remain on stage for a panel photo. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.